All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to get into something that's at the heart of so many of our biggest debates, how we make laws. Specifically, we're looking at that tension between what feels like the right thing to do and what the evidence shows us actually works. It's a real puzzle, and it explains a lot.
Okay, so let's just dive right into the central question, shall we? I mean, we all want policies that make things better. Nobody sets out to make a bad law, but we've all seen it happen. The most well-meaning rules can just completely backfire. So what is going on there? Why does that happen so often?
You hear this kind of thing all the time, don't you? On the news, in political speeches. It's this really emotional, really powerful call to action. It makes a complicated problem sound like it has a simple fix. And you know, on the surface, it feels good. It feels decisive.
And let's be honest, that gut instinct to just ban stuff we think is bad, it's totally human. We want our laws to reflect our values, our sense of right and wrong. So just to be super clear, this isn't some kind of attack on morality itself. Not at all.
This right here, this is the absolute key. A moral principle is one thing, but a law, that's a totally different beast. A law creates a system, and that system has real, tangible consequences out in the world, whether we want them or not. The problem kicks in when we feel so sure we're right that we forget to check if the system we built is actually doing any good.
So that brings us right to the core of it, really, the massive gap that can open up between our intentions and the actual outcomes. We're going to shift our focus now away from the why behind a policy, that good moral intention, to the what. What really happens when that policy hits the streets?
The source material for this explainer uses this brilliant analogy. So think about sending an email. If you write it to one person, your meaning is probably crystal clear. But what happens if you send those exact same words to, say, 1 million people? Well, you're going to get thousands of different interpretations, people finding loopholes, and all sorts of unexpected reactions. Policy works the same way. What seems so simple and obvious to a small committee of lawmakers can get incredibly messy when it's applied to millions of people living complex lives.
Now, this is what's so fascinating. When these policies go wrong, it's not random. There's a pattern, and it looks a lot like this. You start with this really strong moral goal. That leads to some firm, clear rules, but then the harm doesn't go away. It just pops up somewhere else. Enforcement becomes a total mess. And in the end, when it's clear things aren't working, everyone blames the bad implementation, not the original idea. Sound familiar?
So here's the point. This pattern isn't an accident or just bad luck. It's the direct result of asking one type of question and completely ignoring another. And this reveals that there are two fundamentally different ways to think about making a law in the first place.
So on one side, you have this mindset that's all about expressing a value, sending a signal about what we stand for. And that feels good, it's emotionally satisfying. But then there's this other mindset, which is obsessed with a much more practical question. Okay, but what are people actually going to do next? What are all the knock-on effects we haven't thought about?
And this just lays out the difference perfectly. The virtue-led thinking is asking, what message are we sending, and what line do we want to draw in the sand? But the evidence-led thinking is asking totally different things. What will people really do? And, this is the big one, when things go wrong, which system ends up having to clean up the mess? They're just not playing the same game.
And that last question, which system picks up the mess? Well, that leads us to the hidden cost of all this. Because when a policy fails, the bill doesn't usually go to the people who wrote the law. Oh no, the price is paid by someone else, somewhere totally different in the system.
Just think about that for a second. When a feel-good law creates all these unintended consequences, where does that damage actually surface? It's almost never in the place you'd expect.
For starters, the cost lands right here. It shows up as a mountain of new casework, clogging up our legal system, which now has to deal with the fallout from a law that wasn't properly thought through.
It also lands here, in our hospital emergency rooms. They're the ones who have to handle the very real physical health crises that happen when risky behavior is just shoved into the shadows instead of being managed safely. And it lands here, with our already stretched mental health services. They're left to support the people who've been harmed by a system that was never actually designed with their reality in mind.
And finally, it lands right here, in the budgets of local councils and authorities. They get told they're underfunded, but what's really happening is they're being forced to pay the hidden bill for someone else's symbolic moral victory.
So when you see all these hidden costs piling up in all these different places, it really forces you to take a step back and ask a much bigger question. Looking at this divide between the virtue-led and the evidence-led approach, what is the fundamental choice we're really making as a society?
And when you strip it all down, this is the choice. It's between telling ourselves a comforting story about who we are and what we believe, or actually knuckling down and building a workable system that reduces real-world harm, even if that's messy and complicated and doesn't feel quite as satisfying.
And we'll leave you with this last thought, because it just says it all. A law can't just make a human behavior disappear by wishing it away. All a law can really do is decide how we as a society are going to deal with it. Is our approach going to be managed, effective, and maybe a little bit boring? Or is it going to be reactive, chaotic, and incredibly expensive? That choice? Well, that choice is everything.